The antimatter torpedoes split the void of space, flaring into existence from nothingness. Admiral Nolan Burns watched the experimental weapons streak towards the vast Wadi warfleet on the view screen, heart pounding. This was humanity's last stand. In the 29th century, mankind had spread to the stars, colonizing dozens of worlds, but remained a minor power compared to the advanced alien civilizations that dominated the galaxy. The reptilian Wadi saw the scattered human settlements as easy pickings, planets ripe for conquest. Burns, hero of the Martian Rebellion and Earth's greatest military mind, had long feared this day would come. Under his directive, Earth's top scientists had labored for years in secret to construct a game-changing superweapon, the antimatter torpedo, prototype weapons that might just give humanity a fighting chance against superior alien numbers and technology. But the Wadi invasion had come too soon, before Project Starfire could be completed. The aliens struck without warning, led by Kalar, the ruthless Wadi Supreme Commander. The Blitzkrieg was devastating in its speed and ferocity. Within days, the Wadi captured or glassed nearly half of Earth's colonies, bombarding them from orbit and slaughtering millions. Now the Wadi Armada hurtled towards the heart of human space. Burns had gambled everything on these untested weapons. He'd rushed the first production run of torpedoes to the front and ordered a suicidal interception. It was a desperate bid to save his species. The antimatter warheads had to work, or mankind would burn, eradicated by a pitiless alien foe. The antimatter torpedoes detonated in silent fury against the Wadi ships, the blinding flashes visible even from the bridge of Admiral Burns's command vessel. For a moment, hope surged in his chest as a dozen alien capital ships vanished in bursts of pure energy, their indestructible hulls dissolving into clouds of incandescent plasma. But the feeling was short-lived. The Wadi Armada barely hesitated, the suicidally brave reptilians driving their ships forward into the teeth of the human weapons. Hundreds of vessels surged ahead, unleashing a hellstorm of fire from their advanced beam cannons and missile batteries. On the bridge of the UES Invictus, Captain Marcus Reeves gritted his teeth as his ship shuddered under the impacts. Damage reports flooded in, the voices of his crew taut with tension but unbroken by panic. They had a job to do. "Helm, bring us about," Reeves barked. "Tactical, fire the remaining antimatter torpedoes, empty the tubes." The Invictus wheeled ponderously, presenting its battered flank to the enemy as its torpedo bays disgorged salvo after salvo of the revolutionary weapons. Each antimatter warhead found its mark, vaporizing Wadi ships in star-bright conflagrations. But for every alien vessel destroyed, two more swept in to take its place, pounding the human flagship with a rain of fire. In the Invictus's CIC, Dr. Eliza Novak watched the displays with a mixture of awe and despair. The antimatter torpedoes were performing beyond her wildest projections, annihilating Wadi ships with casual ease. But there were simply too many of them. The sheer size of the alien armada defied belief. "Hull breaches on decks 7, 12, and 19, an officer shouted over the din of straining bulkheads and shrieking alarms. "We're venting atmosphere." "Seal the compartments," Reeves commanded, his face bathed in the crimson light of flashing warnings. "Novak, what's the status of the torpedoes?" The physicist shook her head grimly. "Magazines are empty, sir. We shot our bolt." Reeves pounded a fist against the arm of his command chair in frustration. He keyed the fleet-wide comms. "Burns, the Invictus is spent," he said heavily. "We've lost main power and life support is failing. Antimatter stores are depleted. We can't hold them, Admiral." There was a pause, then Burns's voice crackled over the channel, resolute but strained. "Understood, Invictus. You've done all you can. Fall back to the rally point at Bastion. We'll make our stand there." Reeves looked around at his bridge crew, seeing the exhaustion and relentless drive in their eyes. They all knew what falling back meant. The Invictus would never survive the gauntlet of Wadi ships in its current condition. This was a one-way trip. The captain drew himself up, lips pursed. "It's been an honor serving with all of you. Let's make sure the Wadi never forget the name Invictus." As the dying human flagship clawed its way free of the engagement zone, Supreme Commander Kalar watched with cold satisfaction from the bridge of the inexorable. The antimatter weapons had given him pause, but his strategy of attrition had carried the day. The primitives could not hope to match the industrial might and numberless legions of the Wadi Empire. But as satisfying as this victory was, Kalar knew the true prize lay ahead. He would scour the human worlds, seizing their antimatter technology and adding it to the Wadi's already formidable arsenal. With such power at his disposal, not even the ancient and aloof Krell would be able to ignore the Empire's dominion over the stars. Kalar savored the thought, already anticipating the rewards that the Emperor would shower upon him for this triumph. He would be proclaimed the greatest conqueror in Wadi history, his name revered for generations. And the humans would be naught but dust and memory, a footnote in the glorious annals of his ascent. "Set course for the human fortress world," Kalar rasped to his helmsman, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "Prepare for orbital bombardment and landing operations. We will wring every last scrap of antimatter knowledge from their feeble minds, and then we will exterminate them, slowly and utterly. Let the galaxy bear witness to the folly of defying the Wadi." As the battered survivors of the human battle group limped towards the safety of Bastion, Admiral Burns watched the displays aboard his command ship with a heavy heart. The losses had been catastrophic, but they had bought time. Time to regroup, to rearm, to hope. The antimatter torpedoes had proven they could ravage even the largest Wadi vessels. There was a chance now, however slim. Burns thought of the millions of humans on the besieged colony worlds, huddled in bunkers and praying for salvation. He thought of the defiant men and women crewing the remaining human warships, readying themselves for the fight to come. He thought of all the soldiers that had sacrificed their lives to buy this chance. And in that moment, he swore to himself that their sacrifice would not be in vain. If humanity was to perish, it would not go quietly into the long night. It would rage, a bright flame of defiance that would sear the stars and shake the galaxy to its foundations. The Wadi would learn to their eternal regret the indomitable spirit, the unconquerable will of mankind. The antimatter war had only just begun. The remnants of humanity's fleet limped towards Bastion, a heavily fortified world that stood as mankind's last bastion of hope. Admiral Burns watched from the bridge of his command ship as the battered vessels emerged from hyperspace, their hulls scorched and pockmarked from the brutal engagement with the Wadi Armada. "Status report," Burns barked, his eyes fixed on the looming orb of Bastion. "All remaining ships accounted for, sir," his XO replied. "Bastion's orbital defenses are at full readiness." Burns nodded grimly. "Signal all ships. We make our stand here." On the surface of Bastion, klaxons blared as the colony's inhabitants rushed to prepare for the impending assault. Governor Elias Harding strode through the corridors of the Colonial Administration Building, issuing rapid-fire orders to his staff. "I want every civilian in the deep shelters within the hour," he commanded. "And get me a direct line to Colonel Hawkins. We need to coordinate our ground defenses." In the orbital shipyards above Bastion, Dr. Warren Pierce supervised the frantic efforts to arm the human fleet with the latest antimatter weapons. Technicians swarmed over the hulls of destroyers and cruisers, installing torpedo tubes and reinforcing power systems. "Careful with those warheads," Pierce shouted as a team maneuvered a crate of antimatter torpedoes. "One false move and we'll vaporize half the shipyard." The doctor's eyes widened as he caught sight of humanity's newest weapon gliding into dock. The UES Nemesis, a sleek battleship overflowing with advanced weaponry, represented the pinnacle of human military technology. If anything could turn the tide against the Wadi, it was this ship. Admiral Burns wasted no time transferring his flag to the Nemesis. As he stepped onto the bridge, a hush fell over the crew. Burns took his place in the command chair, surveying the banks of holographic displays. "This is where we hold the line," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the bridge. "This is where we show the Wadi that humanity will not go quietly into the night." The sensors lit up as the Wadi Armada dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Thousands of alien warships filled the void, their hulls gleaming with malevolent purpose. "All ships, battle stations," Burns ordered. "Prepare to engage." The two fleets clashed in a maelstrom of light and fire. Antimatter torpedoes lanced out from human vessels, their detonations turning Wadi capital ships into expanding clouds of plasma. But for every alien ship destroyed, 3 more took its place. On the bridge of the Nemesis, Burns directed the battle with cold precision. "Concentrate fire on their command ships," he instructed. "We need to disrupt their coordination." The massive battleship surged forward, its weapons blazing. Wadi vessels crumbled under the onslaught, but return fire hammered the Nemesis shields. "Hull breach on deck 7, an officer shouted, "Sealing bulkheads." Burns gripped the arms of his chair as the ship shuddered. "Keep pressing the attack. We can't let up now." On Bastion's surface, Colonel Marcus Hawkins peered through macro binoculars at the sky. Fireballs streaked across the atmosphere as debris from the orbital battle rained down. "Here they come," he muttered, spotting the telltale contrails of Wadi dropships. "All units, prepare to engage." The alien landing craft slammed into Bastion's forests and plains. Reptilian warriors poured out, their scales glinting in the planet's twin suns. Human defenders opened fire from fortified positions, energy weapons and ballistic rounds tearing into the Wadi ranks. Governor Harding found himself in the thick of the fighting, a plasma rifle clutched in his trembling hands. He'd never fired a weapon in anger before, but as he saw a Wadi warrior bearing down on a group of militia, instinct took over. The governor squeezed the trigger, and the alien dropped in a heap. "Not bad for a politician," Colonel Hawkins remarked, appearing at Harding's side. "But we need to fall back to the capital. We can't hold them here." In orbit, the battle had reached a fever pitch. The Nemesis drove deep into the heart of the Wadi fleet, its antimatter torpedoes wreaking havoc. But the constant pounding had taken its toll on the mighty ship. "Admiral," Dr. Pierce's voice crackled over the comms, "we've lost containment on the primary antimatter storage. We need to evacuate." Burns's face hardened as he absorbed the news. There was only one option left. "Helm, set collision course for the Wadi flagship," he ordered. "We're taking that bastard with us." The Nemesis accelerated, plowing through enemy fire. It slammed into the massive Wadi vessel, antimatter reserves detonating in a blinding flash that consumed both ships and a dozen others nearby. On the Retribution, newly arrived with her relief fleet, Admiral Sasha Ivanova watched the explosion with a mixture of awe and grief. "For Burns," she whispered before turning to her crew. "All ships, engage! Hit them with everything we've got!" Fresh antimatter torpedoes streaked from the human vessels, catching the Wadi fleet off guard. Alien ships began to break formation, turning to flee. In the rubble-strewn streets of Bastion's capital, Colonel Hawkins and Governor Harding led a ragtag group of defenders in a desperate last stand. Energy bolts sizzled overhead as Wadi troops pressed their attack. "We can't hold much longer," Harding shouted over the din of battle. Hawkins was about to reply when his comms unit crackled to life. "Ground forces, this is Admiral Ivanova. Wadi fleet is in full retreat. Hang on down there. We're coming for you." As the sound of human dropships filled the air, Hawkins allowed himself a grim smile. They'd survived. For now. Now. The Wadi dropships rocketed back into orbit, leaving behind a landscape of devastation and the echoes of battle. Admiral Sasha Ivanova's boots crunched on the debris-strewn ground as she surveyed the aftermath. The acrid smell of burning antimatter facilities stung her nostrils, a constant reminder of the scorched earth tactics that had saved Bastion from complete subjugation. "Status report," she barked to her aide. "Casualties are high, ma'am. We're still tallying the numbers, but early estimates suggest we've lost at least 30% of our ground forces and civilian population." Ivanova's teeth gritted. "And the antimatter production facilities?" "Completely destroyed. Our sabotage teams did their job well. The entire area is now a radioactive wasteland." She nodded grimly. "A necessary sacrifice. We couldn't let that technology fall into Wadi hands." As they walked through the ruins of Bastion's capital, Ivanova's comm unit crackled to life. "Admiral, we've discovered something. You need to see this immediately." Minutes later, she stood in a makeshift command center, staring at holographic displays showcasing intercepted Wadi communications and surveillance footage. Shapeshifters, she breathed, watching as a seemingly human colonist morphed into a reptilian Wadi warrior. They've been among us all along. Colonel Hawkins, his uniform still stained with alien blood, stepped forward. What are your orders, Admiral? Ivanova's eyes hardened. Implement full martial law. I want every colonist screened and vetted. Anyone showing the slightest signs of being an infiltrator is to be detained immediately. Ma'am? Hawkins hesitated. That's going to cause panic among the civilians. We're talking about imprisoning our own people without trial. These are extraordinary times, Colonel, Ivanova snapped. I won't risk losing Bastion to alien saboteurs. Carry out my orders. As the crackdown began, tension gripped the colony. Civilians huddled in their homes, fearful of both Wadi infiltrators and overzealous military patrols. Detention centers filled with suspected sympathizers, their protests falling on deaf ears. Governor Harding approached Ivanova as she oversaw the fortification of Bastion's remaining defenses. Admiral, the people are growing restless. These measures are absolutely necessary, Ivanova cut him off. I don't expect you to understand military strategy, Governor. Focus on keeping the civilians calm and compliant. Harding's face reddened, but he held his tongue. As he turned to leave, Ivanova's comm unit chimed again. Admiral, we're receiving distress calls from multiple colonies, a communications officer reported. It seems the wealthy elites are abandoning their worlds, leaving the rest of the population defenseless. Ivanova's fists clenched. Put me through to Commander Voronov on Demios 4. The haggard face of Voronov appeared on the holo display. Admiral, the situation here is critical. The oligarchs are fleeing with their private armies, leaving us exposed to Wadi attack. Hold your ground, Commander, Ivanova ordered. Do whatever it takes to maintain our defensive positions. Voronov's eyes blazed with a mix of fury and willpower. Understood, Admiral. We won't let these cowards sacrifice our world for their own safety. As the transmission ended, Ivanova turned to her strategic team. The Wadi think they've won this round, but they've only given us an opportunity. It's time we showed them the true power of antimatter weaponry. She gestured to a holographic display of the nearby star systems. We're going to set a trap, and the bait will be humanity's greatest scientific achievement. Prepare for Operation Supernova. Nova Genesis. Admiral Ivanova's eyes gleamed as she gazed at the holographic display of the uninhabited star system. It would serve as the centerpiece for humanity's most daring gambit yet. Captain Reeves, Colonel Gray, she addressed the two officers standing at attention before her. The time has come to strike back. Captain Marcus Reeves, a stocky man with a closely cropped salt and pepper beard, stepped forward. Admiral, I've analyzed the star charts. Nova Genesis and its neighboring systems offer the perfect killing ground. Ivanova nodded. Explain. Reeves manipulated the hologram, zooming in on specific sectors. We seed these areas with high-density antimatter mines. To the Wadi, it'll look like we're stockpiling weapons. In reality, we're building a graveyard, Colonel Jackson Gray finished, his lean face set in fierce dedication. Precisely, Ivanova said. Gray, your team will handle sabotage operations. Target Wadi supply lines, staging areas, anything to cripple their ability to sustain a prolonged engagement. Gray's eyes glinted. My commandos are ready, Admiral. We'll make the Wadi regret ever setting foot in human space. As the officers delved into the specifics of their plan, a junior communications tech burst into the room. Admiral, we've intercepted a Wadi transmission. It's Supreme Commander Kalar himself. The holo display flickered, replaced by the reptilian visage of the Wadi leader. His scales gleamed with an oily sheen as he addressed his subordinates. The humans grow desperate, Kalar hissed. Our spies report vast stockpiles of antimatter weapons in the Nova Genesis sector. We will seize these weapons and crush what remains of their pitiful resistance. Ivanova allowed herself a small, cold smile as the transmission ended. And so the trap is baited. Let's get to work. Weeks passed in a flurry of covert activity. Reeves's ships slipped through the void, seeding thousands of antimatter mines across the chosen systems. Each was a silent harbinger of devastation, waiting for the Wadi to spring the trap. Meanwhile, Gray led his strike teams on a series of lightning raids against Wadi outposts. Antimatter charges were planted with surgical precision, primed to sever critical supply arteries at the moment of humanity's choosing. Aboard his flagship, the Dominion's Fang, Supreme Commander Kellar marshaled his forces. Thousands of Wadi warships gathered, their hulls dripping with weapons. The antimatter stockpiles would be his, and with them, he would erase humanity from the galaxy. "All ships prepare for warp," Kellar commanded. "Victory awaits us in Nova Genesis." The Wadi Armada surged forward, tearing holes in the fabric of space-time. They emerged in the heart of Nova Genesis, sensors immediately locking onto the false antimatter signatures. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then Nova Genesis lived up to its name. The void erupted in a cataclysm of light and energy as thousands of antimatter mines detonated simultaneously. Entire Wadi battle groups simply ceased to exist, vaporized in the fury of matter-meeting antimatter. Those ships on the periphery were hurled aside like leaves in a hurricane, their crews screaming as radiation flooded their vessels. Aboard the Dominion's Fang, Kellar roared in pain and fury as the bridge viewports polarized to their maximum setting. Even so, the searing light burned afterimages into his retinas. "Evasive maneuvers," he bellowed. "Get us out of here." But there was nowhere to run. As the Wadi fleet reeled, human strike craft materialized from pre-positioned staging areas. They swarmed among the disoriented alien ships, delivering their deadly antimatter payloads with merciless efficiency. Across Wadi-controlled space, Gray's sabotage operations bore fruit. Supply depots erupted in flames, shipyards crumbled, and communication relays fell silent. The invasion force found itself cut off and surrounded. Ivanova watched the battle unfold from her command chair, her face illuminated by the holo displays showing the unfolding carnage. "Status report," she ordered. "Wadi fleet is in full retreat, Admiral," her tactical officer replied. "Estimates show over 80% of their forces destroyed or disabled." "Pursue and eliminate," Ivanova commanded. "I want every last Wadi ship hunted down." As the human fleet moved to engage, the Admiral allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. The Wadi had learned a harsh lesson about humanity's perseverance, but Ivanova knew the war was just getting started. Even now, she pondered their next move, knowing that the survival of the human race hung in the balance. The acrid stench of vaporized matter hung heavy in the recycled air of the Retribution's bridge. Admiral Sasha Ivanova stared at the holo displays, her eyes reflecting the ghostly afterimages of antimatter detonations. The devastating ambush had shattered the Wadi fleet, but victory tasted like ash in her mouth. "Casualty reports from Nova Genesis and surrounding systems," her aide reported, voice hollow. "Civilian deaths estimated at 12 million. 4 major colony hubs completely vaporized." Ivanova's fingers dug into the arms of her command chair. "Understood. Dispatch relief ships to the affected areas immediately." As the Retribution prowled through the debris field that was once a mighty alien armada, Ivanova's comm crackled to life. "Admiral," Captain Reeves's gruff voice came through. "We've intercepted Wadi communications. It appears Supreme Commander Kellar has abandoned his forces." "Elaborate," Ivanova ordered, leaning forward. "He's transmitted conflicting withdrawal orders, ma'am. The remaining Wadi units are in disarray." A predatory gleam entered Ivanova's eyes. "Excellent. Deploy our hunter-killer squadrons. I want those pockets of resistance eliminated." Across the sector, human ships pounced on the confused and leaderless Wadi. Energy beams lanced through alien hulls, while pinpoint antimatter strikes erased entire formations from existence. On the planet Hethril Prime, Vice Admiral Marcus Reeves watched grimly as orbital bombardment reduced Wadi fortifications to radioactive slag. The night sky lit up with each antimatter detonation, casting stark shadows across the ruined cityscape below. "Sir," his XO reported, "Wadi resistance is crumbling. Their remaining forces are concentrated in the Western Hemisphere." Reeves nodded. Maintain bombardment. I want those bastards scoured from this world. As the fleet continued its relentless assault, a priority transmission came through. Reeves's eyebrows rose as he read the orders. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. All ships, new heading. We're pushing deeper into Wadi territory. On Bastion, newly appointed Governor Lydia Hayes stood before a restless crowd. The harsh glare of improvised floodlights cast deep shadows across faces etched with fear and anger. I know you've suffered, Hayes began, her voice carrying across the assembly. The military's actions during the occupation were nothing short of tyranny, a voice shouted from the crowd. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. Hayes raised her hands placatingly. I understand your anger, but we must work together to rebuild. Why should we trust Earth? Another voice called out. Bastion stands alone. As the crowd grew more agitated, Hayes caught sight of a figure in military fatigues observing from the shadows. Colonel Jackson Gray gave her a slight nod before melting away into the night. In orbit above a nameless, ravaged world, the sleek lines of a Voltron dynamic survey ship gleamed in the light of a distant star. Inside, technicians pored over sensor readings and resource projections. This is it, the lead surveyor announced, grinning. Traces of rare earth elements, expanses of pristine real estate. Gentlemen, we've hit the jackpot. As the ship prepared to move on to the next abandoned system, none aboard noticed the cloaked Wadi courier slipping silently past, carrying its precious cargo of the once mighty Supreme Commander Kellar into the depths of space. The Retribution's engines pulsed as it maneuvered through the debris field. Admiral Ivanova's eyes narrowed, scanning tactical readouts. Set course for Coro 5, she ordered. It's time we took back what's ours. Captain Marcus Reeves stood on the bridge of the Thunderbolt, lead ship of the Coro Liberation Fleet. The planet's pockmarked surface filled the view screen, a stark reminder of the devastation wrought by the Wadi occupation. Antimatter strike teams, deploy, Reeves commanded. Sleek shuttles dropped from the Thunderbolt's belly, streaking toward the ravaged mining colony below. As boots hit the ground, an eerie silence enveloped the strike teams. Where they expected fierce resistance, they found only desolation. The industrial sector lay in ruins, twisted metal and shattered concrete stretching to the horizon. Lieutenant Sato's voice crackled over the comm. Captain, you need to see this. Reeves made his way to Sato's position, the acrid stench of scorched earth filling his nostrils. His stomach churned at the sight before him. Thousands of robotic drones lay scattered across the ground, their metallic bodies contorted in unnatural angles. Sato ran a scanner over the nearest automaton. EMP strike, he reported grimly. Their positronic matrices are completely fried. As the teams pushed deeper into the colony, the true horror of Coro 5 revealed itself. In a clearing surrounded by the husks of deactivated security bots, they found the mass graves. Reeves knelt beside one of the crude pits, his mind focused. The bodies of the human overseers and their families lay tangled together, expressions of terror forever etched on their faces. Sir, a young soldier called out, her voice wavering, there are children here. The captain stood, fists clenched at his sides. Document everything, he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. The galaxy needs to see what happened here. News of Coro V's liberation spread rapidly across human space. Ivanova watched from her command center as protests erupted on a dozen worlds, the public's fury at the Wadi atrocities reaching a fever pitch. On Hethril Prime, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Colonel Jackson Gray strode through the corridors of the Planetary Administration Building, the sound of angry voices growing louder with each step. He burst into the conference room, where newly appointed Administrator Jonas Bourne faced a sea of furious faces. The antimatter stockpiles belong to the people, a burly man shouted, hitting his fist on the table. We have a right to defend ourselves. Bourne's face remained impassive. I understand your concerns, but those munitions are vital to our strategic... Enough of your lies, another voice cut in. You just want to keep us under your boot. Gray stepped forward, his presence momentarily quelling the uproar. Gentlemen, I assure you that the military has no intention of... A deafening explosion rocked the building, cutting off Gray's words. Alarms blared as security personnel rushed into the room. "Sir," a lieutenant reported, face ashen. "There's been a breach at the Antimatter facility." Gray's blood ran cold. "Lockdown protocols?" "Engaged, but—" The lieutenant hesitated. "Sir, it's Samantha. She's inside." The colonel's niece, a civilian contractor with top-level clearance, and now, potentially, the spark that would ignite Hethrill's powder keg. As Gray raced toward the facility, his mind reeled. What was Samantha's angle? Sympathy for the rebels? Black market profiteering? Or something far worse? The antimatter containment alarms shrieked their warning as Gray approached the perimeter. He caught a glimpse of Samantha's face through a window, her expression unreadable as she manipulated the facility's controls. "Samantha," he shouted, "stand down. Whatever you're doing, it's not worth—" The world turned white. A searing flash obliterated the facility, leaving nothing but a smoldering crater where Gray's niece had stood moments before. As the shock wave knocked him off his feet, the colonel realized that Hethrill's fragile peace had just gone up in flames. Light years away, on the Wadi homeworld, Supreme Commander Kellar's disgrace had opened the door for a new era of brutality. Darvix, leader of the hardline faction, stood before the assembled military leadership, his scales filled with awe-inspiring rage. "The humans think they have won," Darvix hissed, his claws digging into the podium. "They celebrate while our once great empire crumbles. I say, let them revel in their false victory." A chorus of approving snarls filled the chamber. "For we shall rise again," Darvix continued, his eyes gleaming with fanatic intensity. "And this time, we will not rest until every human world burns." As the Wadi leadership descended into bloodthirsty plotting, Admiral Ivanova sat alone in her quarters aboard the Retribution. The weight of command pressed down on her shoulders as she contemplated the challenges ahead. The Wadi were on the back foot, but for how long? And could humanity truly unite in the face of this new threat? Or would they tear themselves apart from within? Ivanova's fingers danced across her datapad, drafting new orders. The window for action was rapidly closing. If humanity was to survive, they would need to move quickly and decisively. Admiral Ivanova's fingers hovered over the transmit button, her eyebrows furrowed as she considered the gravity of her next move. With a decisive tap, she sent out the encrypted summons that would bring humanity's key military and scientific minds to the Retribution. Within hours, the ship's cavernous war room buzzed with tense energy. Holographic displays flickered to life, painting the assembled faces in an eerie blue glow. Ivanova's gaze swept across the gathering, noting the deep lines of exhaustion etched into every countenance. "We stand at a crossroads," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber. "The Wadi are on their heels, but make no mistake, this war is just getting started." Admiral Grant Keller, a bear of a man with steel-gray hair, leaned forward. "Then we finish them," he growled. "We have the antimatter advantage. I say we push deeper into their territory, wipe out every last—" "And how many more civilian casualties are you willing to accept, Admiral?" The sharp retort came from Dr. Aliyah Zara, her dark eyes flashing. "We've already lost millions. If we continue this path of indiscriminate destruction, we risk pushing even moderate Wadi factions into the arms of the extremists." Keller's face reddened. "So we should just sit back and wait for them to regroup, to develop countermeasures?" As the debate raged, Colonel Gray's datapad chirped with an incoming transmission. He excused himself, slipping out into an adjacent corridor. The message was brief, but its implications were staggering. "Crucial intel, shield tech, need extraction. well." Gray's mind raced. A Wadi defector with antimatter defense schematics could change everything. But the risks... He strode back into the war room, where the argument had devolved into impossibly strong chaos. "Admiral," Gray interrupted, "I have a situation that requires immediate attention." Ivanova's eyes narrowed, sensing the urgency in his tone. She called for a recess, following Gray to a secure briefing room. As he laid out the potential defector's offer, Ivanova's expression grew grave. "You're certain this Lila can be trusted?" she asked. Gray shook his head. No, but the potential payoff is too great to ignore. Ivanova nodded slowly. Assemble your team, but tread carefully, Colonel. If this is a trap— Understood, Admiral. Gray paused, then added, There's one more thing. I want Samantha on the extraction team. Ivanova's eyebrows shot up. Your niece, after Hethril? She knows Wadi systems better than anyone, Gray argued. And I need to know where she stands. As Gray left to prepare for the mission, Ivanova returned to the war room. The shouting had subsided, but the tension remained palpable. Dr. Zara stepped forward. Admiral, we've been analyzing comm chatter from occupied territories. There are Wadi factions open to negotiation. If we could just— A thunderous explosion rocked the ship, cutting off Zara's words. Alarms blared as Ivanova raced to the bridge, the assembled leaders hot on her heels. Report, she barked. Antimatter detonation in the She-Scorpies system, her tactical officer replied, face ashen. It's gone, ma'am. The entire Wadi colony. A hush fell over the bridge, Ivanova's knuckles tightening as she gripped the command rail. Source? The officer swallowed hard. Unknown, but the signature? It matches our weapons. Ivanova's blood ran cold. As she stared at the swirling chaos on the tactical displays, one thought echoed through her mind. The war had entered a new, terrifying phase, and humanity's greatest threat might come from within. Within, and she knew the time for half measures had passed. All hands, battle stations, Ivanova commanded, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside her. And get me Captain Reeves on a secure channel. As the Retribution's crew scrambled to action, Ivanova retreated to her private ready room. The hollow display flickered to life, revealing Reeves's grim visage. Captain, she began, I need a full account of what happened in the She-Scorpies system. Now. Reeves' eyes hardened. Admiral, I take full responsibility for my actions. We intercepted a civilian transport carrying the disgraced Supreme Commander Kalar. I made the call to eliminate the target. A civilian transport? Dr. Zara's voice rose in disbelief from behind Ivanova. Captain, do you have any idea? I know exactly what I've done, Reeves cut in, his eyes hard. And I'd do it again. Kalar may have been on the run, but he still commanded loyalty. Every moment he remained alive was a chance for the Wadi to regroup. Ivanova's fingers drummed against her desk. You realize this will require a full tribunal? I understand, Admiral, and I'll face whatever consequences come, but I stand by my decision. As the transmission ended, Ivanova turned to face the gathered leadership. Admiral Keller's face was flushed with almost unchecked approval, while Dr. Zara looked ashen. We can't condone this, Zara pleaded. The targeting of civilian transports, the disregard for collateral damage, we're no better than— Then what? Keller interjected, his voice booming. Then the monsters who slaughtered children on Koro 5? Reeves made the hard call, and I say it's about time we stop pulling our punches. The arguments raged as Ivanova convened the tribunal. Evidence was presented, impassioned speeches were made, but in the end, the decision was clear. Captain Marcus Reeves was cleared of all charges, his actions deemed a necessary evil in the face of the Wadi threat. As the tribunal adjourned, Keller cornered Ivanova in the corridor. This changes everything, he said, a predatory gleam in his eyes. No more tiptoeing around. It's time to finish this war once and for all. Ivanova watched as Keller strode away, barking orders into his comm unit. She knew she should feel relief at the decisive action, but a cold dread settled in her stomach. The floodgates had been opened, and she wasn't sure they could ever be closed again. Across human space, the repercussions of the tribunal's decision rippled outward. On the colony world of Hyperion 3, Dmitry Zakharov stood before a roaring crowd, his arms raised in triumph. You see, he bellowed, his eyes blazing with fervor, even our own military recognizes the truth. There can be no peace, no coexistence with the alien menace. The crowd's answering roar shook the prefab walls of the makeshift gathering hall. Zakharov's xenophobic cult had been gaining traction for months, but now their message of human supremacy found fertile ground in the war-weary populace. But it's not enough to merely defend ourselves, Zakharov continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We must secure our future, and to do that we must strike first, against all who would threaten humanity's rightful place among the stars. As Zakharov's followers erupted in frenzied cheers, Colonial Security Chief Ilara Voss watched from the shadows, her face grim. She keyed her comm unit. It's worse than we thought. We need to move on that antimatter cache now, before... A deafening explosion cut off her words. Voss stumbled as the ground shook beneath her feet. Through the choking dust and panicked screams, she caught sight of Zakharov's lieutenants herding a group of haggard prisoners, the colony's governing council. Traitors and alien sympathizers, Zakharov's voice boomed over hastily erected loudspeakers. We offer you one chance at redemption. Join us in our holy crusade, or face the judgment of the people. Voss's hand tightened on her sidearm, but she knew it was hopeless. Zakharov's cult had moved faster and more decisively than anyone had anticipated. As she watched them drag the terrified council members away, she realized with sickening clarity that Hyperion 3 had fallen. Light years away in the sterile confines of a Wadi research facility, Lila's scales rippled with anxiety as she uploaded the last of the encrypted data packets. The risk she was taking was almost unthinkable, but after witnessing the brutality inflicted on her own people by Darvix and his hardliners, she knew there was no other choice. A muffled explosion echoed through the facility's corridors. Lila's head snapped up, her inner eyelids flickering rapidly. They couldn't have found her. Not yet. The lab's reinforced door buckled inward, warped by some unseen force. As it crumpled entirely, Lila found herself face to face with a human strike team, led by a fierce-eyed woman whose expression promised violence. Samantha Gray, Lila said, forcing her voice to remain steady. I've been expecting you. Samantha's eyes narrowed as she took in the Wadi scientist. You're Lila? You better hope that intel of yours is worth the risk. As Samantha's team secured the facility and prepared for extraction, Lila cast one last glance at the lab that had been her home for so long. She knew that her defection would change the course of the war. She only hoped it would be for the better. On the opulent world of Calypso 9, Kale Drago reclined in his luxurious office, a smile playing across his scarred features as he reviewed the latest reports. The infiltration of the antimatter production facilities was proceeding even better than he had hoped. A chime from his secure comm unit interrupted his reverie. What is it? He snapped. Sir, his lieutenant's voice crackled, tinged with worry. We've detected increased activity from Bastion's security forces. It seems Governor Hayes may have caught wind of... Impossible, Drago cut him off. We've been meticulous. Besides, even if Hayes suspects something, she doesn't have the firepower to breach our defenses. As if on cue, alarms began blaring throughout the compound. Drago's smile widened into a feral grin. Let them come, he thought. The real prize was already safely hidden away. Aboard the Retribution, Admiral Ivanova stood before a gathering of her most trusted advisors. The weight of the decisions before her pressed down like a physical force. We stand at a crossroads, she began, her voice low but firm. The Wadi are on the brink of defeat, but our own people are fracturing. Extremism, profiteering, paranoia, we're rotting from within. She activated a holo display, revealing a map of known Wadi territories. There are moderates among them, factions open to negotiation. If we can broker a lasting peace... Peace? Admiral Keller's voice boomed with derision. After everything they've done, the only peace we should offer is the peace of the grave. As the argument escalated, Ivanova's mind raced. She knew that the choices made in the coming days would shape the future of humanity for generations to come. But with hardliners like Keller pushing for total annihilation and the specter of internal strife looming ever larger, she feared that the cost of victory might be too high to bear. The holo display flickered, an urgent message from Colonel Gray demanding her attention. As Ivanova read the encrypted transmission, her blood ran cold. The situation on Hyperion 3 had spiraled out of control, and now Zakharov's xenophobic cult possessed a terrifying new weapon. Ivanova closed her eyes, steeling herself for the difficult decisions ahead. The war might be nearing its end, but she knew the real battle was only just beginning. The encrypted transmission from Colonel Gray faded from the holo display, leaving Admiral Ivanova staring into the void. The situation on Hyperion 3 was worse than she'd feared. Zakharov's cult now possessed antimatter weaponry, a development that threatened to shatter the delicate balance of power. Before Ivanova could formulate a response, alarms blared throughout the Retribution. The ship rocked violently, nearly throwing her off her feet. "Admiral!" Her tactical officer's voice crackled over the comm. "We're under attack. Multiple ships bearing Terran Navy IFF, but they're firing on us." Ivanova's blood ran cold as realization dawned. "Keller," she whispered. The bridge erupted into chaos as damage reports flooded in. Through the cacophony, Ivanova's mind raced. She'd known Keller was a hardliner, but this... "All hands, battle stations," she barked, striding to the command center. "Shields to maximum, return fire, but target weapons and engines only. I want those ships disabled, not destroyed." As the Retribution shuddered under the onslaught, Ivanova opened a channel to the entire fleet. "This is Admiral Ivanova. We are under attack by forces loyal to Admiral Keller. This is an illegal coup attempt. All ships are ordered to stand down immediately." The response was a barrage of antimatter torpedoes that lit up the void. Ivanova watched in horror as loyalist vessels were torn apart, their crews vaporized in silent, terrible flashes. Meanwhile, on Hyperion 3, Colonel Gray and Samantha crouched behind the twisted wreckage of a transport, plasma bolts sizzling overhead. The spaceport was a war zone, Keller's troops battling the remnants of the colonial security forces. "We need to get to that freighter," Gray shouted over the din, gesturing to a battered ship at the far end of the landing pad. "It's our only shot at reaching the orbital defenses." Samantha nodded grimly, checking the charge on her rifle. "I'll draw their fire. You make a run for it." Before Gray could protest, Samantha vaulted over their cover, unleashing a barrage of suppressing fire. Gray sprinted across the exposed tarmac, his heart pounding. He was halfway to the ship when a deafening roar split the air. An antimatter explosion bloomed on the horizon, its searing light casting Gray's shadow before him. The shockwave hit moments later, knocking him off his feet and filling the air with debris. As Gray struggled to his feet, ears ringing, he saw Samantha limping towards him. Her face was streaked with blood and soot, but her eyes burned with willpower. "Zakharov's compound," she gasped, helping Gray up. They just wiped it off the map." Gray's stomach churned. The casualties. But there was no time to dwell on it. They had a mission to complete. Aboard the Retribution, Ivanova's forces had managed to disable several of Keller's ships, but at a terrible cost. Half the Loyalist fleet was gone, and the remainder were badly damaged. "Admiral," Dr. Zara's voice cut through the chaos on the bridge. "I'm receiving a transmission from the Wadi. They're requesting to open negotiations." Ivanova's mind reeled. With Keller's forces still pressing their attack and reports of more antimatter detonations streaming in from across human space, the idea of peace talks seemed absurd. And yet... "Put them through," she ordered, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. The holo display flickered to life, revealing the alien features of a Wadi diplomat. Its scales shimmered with an iridescent sheen that seemed at odds with the gravity of the situation. "Admiral Ivanova," the Wadi began, its voice a sibilant whisper. "We have observed the conflict within your forces. We propose an immediate cessation of hostilities between our peoples. The alternative is mutually assured destruction." As if to punctuate the Wadi's words, another antimatter explosion blossomed in the distance. Ivanova's fingers tightened on the command rail. "I'm listening," she said, acutely aware of the weight of history pressing down upon her shoulders.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.